Is Russia continuing its campaign on its road to nowhere? But does Putin have plans to fix things for Russia, or at least cover them up better? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's January 28th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, when we look at the control map, there are a couple of changes. First, down here in Volodar, right, is you can see that there are minor changes, just a little bit. They look more like adjustments to the Russian line of control in Myskilsky. You can see here a small adjustment where Ukrainian forces actually control everything north of this river and reservoir group, and it gives Russia control of half an empty field. Hooray. But most importantly, Russia has not yet taken Volodar. As we've discussed, Volodar is a pretty tactically difficult spot for Ukrainian forces to defend, simply because there's only one way in or out. Make it very hard to egress if Russia indeed comes in and pushes ground troops into this town. And you guys can also see that if they take Volodar, well, Volodar is sort of oddly defensible because there's so much distance between Volodar and any other town, right? When we look to the north, we can see the other areas of meaningful change are right up here. First is Russian efforts to advance ever so slightly north west of Volodar. You can see they do have control of this roadway here, which I believe is something that they have aspired to get control of for some time. You can see it's an essential component of being able to cut off a thoroughfare into Bakhmut, though I always point out that this probably hasn't been a primary route for some time, simply because it's always been dangerously close to Russian lines. And so even as Russian advances persist, Ukraine has had considerable time to build out new logistics routes to keep the troops in Bakhmut and along the Bakhmut front supplied. That said, it can still be tough, right? Simply because, as you guys can see, if you're a defender in Blahoddatne, it can be tough to you cannot move troops up and down this line of contact here. You'll have to rely instead on running supplies into Vasyukivka and then taking them out across the field, probably by hand or with light vehicles, to get them to troops on the front lines. When we look to the east, you can see there's also some minor changes taking place here. Namely, just a small chunk of territory is being reported as contested as Russians push westward and try to sort of squeeze this small village of Vasile. Village is probably even being generous. It's like a cluster of houses. But I do want to point out that Russia appears to have been fairly diverted from Soledar and is slowly being diverted northward into these very, very low value areas. And I describe them as low value simply because there's minimal urban density. The terrain is very open, very few roads. It's just not all that important for Russia. It's not that important for either side. Again, Bakhmut in the grand scheme of things, not that important, but at least it is a hub of an intersection of several major roadways. You can't even really say that about this area. The nearest village or town of any substance is Siversk, and you can see Siversk itself has been an important logistics hub, especially for Ukrainian forces here along this line of contact of Spirny approaching Lysychansk. But it hasn't really itself. It's not. It doesn't have considerable geopolitical or operational value. But it's not. And you can see it's not really in any danger at this time. Russia is simply continuing to make advances that are measured in the hundreds of meters, maybe a kilometer a day. This is a minimal advance. And if you guys are on the Patreon, you know that we took a look at some drone footage where we watched one of these Russian advances, and you saw just how Ukrainian troops were able to punish the Russian attacking forces, while the Russian forces never even got within striking distance of the Ukrainian troops. It was a good testament on how effective a defense in depth can be, as you force the enemy to expose themselves to maneuver, and you use your troops from a safe distance with considerable standoff to punish the enemy and inflict casualties as they try to maneuver. If, of course, you want access to those sort of uncensored combat videos, the kind YouTube definitely doesn't want me to say and show you, the link is in the description. And the Patreons are a huge supporter for the channel. Obviously, YouTube loves cracking down and demonetizing videos fairly arbitrarily. So again, if you want that extra content, links in the description. When we move over, we can look at War Mapper. There's only one change they recognize that they talk about, and this is, of course, Russian efforts to move from Mykilsky to Volhedar. And that's really about it as far as changes to the control map. No other changes to report. And you can see here again, Russia's continued its policy of widely dispersing its attacking forces across the front lines, right? Some are in Volodar some are in Volodar itself, some are slightly west of Volodar. You have, of course, these attacks being launched near Donetsk city, dispersed as always. And of course, you have a random attack here. This is unusual in Pivnichi, between Donetsk and Bakhmut, right? You've got efforts to push towards Ivanivsky across this big open field, which, as we've talked about, is not a great tactical choice. And Russian troops continue to try and fail to gain this significant foothold in eastern Bakhmut, Krasnohora, and to the north. Again, just no economy of force at all. But is Putin going to try to change things? Well, yeah, maybe. Some Kremlin insiders are telling Bloomberg that Putin is preparing a new offensive to regain the initiative, which, again, they have the initiative if you're being technical about it. It's just very little initiative that may begin as early as February or March. This would explain, of course, some of the leaked audio in which Russian troops are told to conserve ammunition. This would be consistent with preparing for a larger offensive. And ISW thinks it's going to happen in Luhansk Oblast, which is interesting because we haven't seen a ton of activity there. And as we've talked about, Luhansk Oblast favors mechanized warfare. You can see it's open terrain, limited roadways, and fairly light, few developed areas. And this is a problem given that here we've seen Russia fight largely an unmechanized style of warfare, a very attritional, positional type of combat. So it makes me think that perhaps Russian forces, again, I'm not sure what they would do or how they would try to achieve a breakthrough in Kharkiv without real serious mechanization of their forces. If anyone's going to be able to do that, it's probably more likely to be Ukraine. Right? They argue that these attacks near Volhedar and Zaporizhzhia are actually just spoiling attacks or basically deceptions to get Ukraine to deploy troops there away from the Luhansk Oblast. What's also interesting is Putin is issuing preemptive pardons for convicts who agree to serve in Wagner Group. This is interesting because it's sort of like payment up front. It's bad when the convicts are in the stronger negotiating position. They are getting their rewards up front in exchange for serving. I also think that if you're a crafty convict, you may receive your pardon, have your record expunged, then desert to go over to Ukraine. And when they ask you if you've ever been convicted of a crime, the answer is, of course, well, no. Russia, I have no criminal record at all, right? And then you can avoid any uncomfortable questions about what it is that you have or have not done in Russia. So something that definitely a sociopath could definitely exploit to considerable effect. And finally, what I think is interesting is that Russian military command is likely attempting to restrict milbloggers' frontline coverage to regain control over the information space ahead of this new offensive. Right. There are rumors that Russian authorities will require war correspondents to wear press vests to identify themselves as journalists in the combat zone. This is actually considered normal. But again, milbloggers would be like you or me, or another example would be like Civdiv. Imagine requiring a guy like Civdiv to wear a vest, right? He is between a combatant and a milblogger. Right? Some people claim, of course, press are deliberately being targeted. I haven't really seen any evidence that that's true. And yeah, I think this is all part of Russia's efforts to, again, officialize this informal milblogger community that started as something they encouraged because the milbloggers were so very pro-Russian and pro-military, but over time it started to backfire on them. And Russia has been trying all kinds of different tricks and carrots and sticks to get these guys to align with the Kremlin information operations. The problem is that the Kremlin's information operations are terrible and they're contradictory and they don't make any sense. And a lot of these milbloggers have their audience because, you know, a lot like me, I try to make sense and give you guys honest assessments, honest feedback on the conflict as I see it. And that means that I can't toe the line for any particular country or side or faction. And this is especially bothersome to Russia. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Of course, if you want access to those uncensored combat video breakdowns, those are on the Patreon. Thanks so much to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. Thank you guys. I can't thank you enough for your support. It really means a lot given YouTube's increasing move towards trying to be a more family-friendly platform, whatever they decide that means. Anyway, catch you guys later.